Not unsurprisingly, Trevor Phillips' show earlier this morning was dominated by Donald Trump's latest threats to take over Greenland. Trevor is with me now to discuss that and the rest of the week's political news. Always a busy one and always a good time to see you, Trevor, this time on a Sunday morning. We're going to discuss 3 Fs. I'll get on to the other 2 in a minute, but the first one is force. Donald Trump has said we can do this the easy way or the hard way, and really the hard way is a euphemism you would expect for force. We're talking about taking the place. He wants to buy it. Others are saying, well, he may occupy it, he may invade it. And here we are with the threat of tariffs for the UK once more as a result.
Well, I think one thing you've got to understand about Donald Trump is that he comes from New York. And as you know, Matt, half of my family lives in New York because my parents left and emigrated to there half a century ago. And I can hear the language of, I'm not going to use words like mafia or anything like that, but I can hear the words of a New York family in which the chap comes along and says, I want this piece of property and, you know, I'm going to get it and we can make this easy, we can make this hard, make a choice. You know what I'm like, I will do it. And I think...
well, Trevor, he is a Don, after all, so...
Complete, well done. Very, very good. And actually, the truth of the matter is, I'm finding it hard to see how Europe, with all the words and all the rest of it that are being uttered, are going to stop him. Especially if what he does is he offers the Greenlanders $100,000 apiece. Well, you know... One way of looking at this is that the Greenlanders are being invited to exchange one colonial master, Denmark, for another one, America.
Well, the majority of them don't want either, do they? They want self-determination and, you know, being semi-autonomous from Denmark. If they were to become part of the US, they're more likely to become a state as opposed to any semi-autonomy. I wonder, and this follows on from what Katie Ball said to me, and I know what she said to you when she was on your panel, Trevor, if he could be undone by the Republicans themselves because they don't like him taking these autonomous decisions, or fewer of them liking him doing that.
I think it's entirely plausible, but I also think there's a version of this which is just wishful thinking. I mean, people have been saying this about Donald Trump for the past 10 years, that the Republican Party will split, the Republican Party will rebel, there will be people who will stand up against him. Well, look at who's in his government. Marco Rubio, who he derided as little Marco. He has a whole series of people who are essentially in his grasp because he has reshaped the party to in his image. And I know a couple of people on our panel talked about the potential for MAGA, you know, the Make America Great movement, splintering, but I think Venezuela did him a great deal of good with that movement because it reminded his basic supporters that actually the guy does a lot of what he says he wants to do. Now, lots of people think what he says he wants to do is bad, but he's been doing it.
In terms of the people in the inner circle, I think I'm right in saying that in a bygone era, J.D. Vance himself referred to Donald Trump as being fascist. Correct. And that is the second of our F words this morning, because that is one you mentioned to Lisa Nandy in terms of her view of Nigel Farage, another F, and reform. Here's what she had to say.
Would you actually use the word fascist about a Nigel Farage-led government or not?
Well, look, I'm not sure that labels are particularly helpful, but I've got a lot of experience of living with the consequences of othering and people who are trying to divide us from one another. And I guess I would just say that if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, in my experience, it usually is a duck.
So Lisa Nandy giving a pretty clear view of what she thinks. Before we discuss her point, you put this to Zia Youssef from Reform as well, Trevor. Here's what he had to say in response.
Well, I'd say if people actually look at the dictionary definition and then of what fascist means and then look at what this Labour government has done, what has Keir Starmer done? He's cancelled elections now for a grand total around 7.5 million people in a short period of time, including millions of those people have had them cancelled 2 years in a row. His Justice Secretary is withdrawing the right to jury trials. That has been a right that's been around since the Magna Carta. His Attorney General is making, I think, unprecedented and extraordinary political attacks against the Prime Minister's key political rivals. Those, if we're going to start labelling people as such, well, those things sound far, far more worrying than anything Nigel Farage has ever said or done.
You know what, Trevor? I find it remarkable that this is being bandied about these days. You know, to call someone a fascist was a pretty remarkable thing not that long ago. And here it is, used for, well, Zia Youssef is saying Labour have shown fascist tendencies. Lisa Nandy is not disagreeing with Nigel Farage being a fascist. A lot of people think what Donald Trump is doing is certainly has the hallmarks. It's a pretty common word in current parlance.
Yeah, and, you know, I'll add a fourth F to your very clever categorisation and segue. And this is, we've now got a fight. I agree with you that we need to be careful not to devalue the power of certain words. I've had this view about some others, and fascist is one of them, because, as you say, it means a very specific thing. It has a very specific history. And to be fair to him, Zia Youssef did make the point that he wouldn't throw the word back at anybody else because that is, to some extent, disrespectful to those who have actually experienced fascism. But I think you're right to say that there is a kind of coarsening of language, which, in my view, is not. I mean, it's not just impolite and sometimes rather horrible, but it gets in the way of trying to understand what somebody is actually about.
Yeah.
And in that respect, Lisa Nandy was quite right to say labels aren't that helpful. But unfortunately, it seems to me that in politics these days, people on all sides are constantly reaching for ways of labeling their opponents that essentially don't deal with their arguments, but essentially damn them as for their supposed motivations or for something that's in their history and so on, rather than actually trying to deal with what the people are actually trying to say or do.
Yes. I mean, she was answering your question. I know others have been a bit more proactive about it. I wonder, when Reform is still riding high in the polls, if using this kind of terminology can actually be counterproductive for their opponents. Because, look, hundreds of thousands of people support Reform in the UK, and about hundreds of thousands of people do not feel that they are supporting fascists.
Well, there's absolutely no question about that. And if we look at what has happened in the United States, we look at what has happened in France, we look at what has happened in Italy, and we look at what has happened in Germany. The so-called right-wing populists have been accused of all sorts of things. They've been called all sorts of names. And the effect of that has in the last 10 years been essentially to consolidate their support. And I think that one of the things that we're all going to have to get used to, in fact, I was talking to the panel today, Katie Balls and Emily Thornberry and Penny Mordaunt. One of the things we're going to have to get used to is that some of the parties, quote, so-called populists on the right and on the left, have a different approach than the historical parties, who are basically all trying to get to the centre ground, trying to steal voters from the other side. And that's okay if you're in a binary situation where there's only two big parties. When you've got five parties, something different is happening. And what we're seeing with Reform and the Greens, they're not that bothered about people who don't like them. What they're trying to do is to make sure that they're 30% in the case of Reform or 15% in the case of Greens are absolutely consolidated and committed to them. And that means that their approach to politics is just very different. They're not going to compromise. What they're going to do is double down. And I think we've all got to get used to the idea that, you know, some successful political parties now in our democracy aren't going to be that interested in compromising with their opponents.
Yeah, compromise is in short supply, isn't it? The next F is farcical. And I'm using that because the way Robert Jenrick's defection from Conservative to Reform went. Now, if the rumours are true, the speech that he was going to make was left on a printer. Then, of course, Nigel Farage had to very quickly get a press conference together. And Robert Jenrick turned up, well, very late for that one. They're all waiting and twiddling their thumbs to walk in. So it was borderline farcical, of course. But let's talk about the defection itself. There seems to be a steady stream now, because it feels like, you know, a lifetime ago that Nadeem Zahawi did that, and that was also this week as well, let's not forget. So let's just address that before we hear from Dame Penny Mordaunt on her views. So just address that first, Trevor, that farcical element.
Well, I started the show by saying that the first English Prime Minister said that every man's got his price, or, you know, there's a price for everybody. And what he was talking about was corruption of his time and so on. I think the point here is that it's not money that will get people across to reform. It is the prospect of the currency that really matters in politics, which is power. And that's why you're seeing these defections, that bit by bit, people are beginning to suspect that Nigel Farage may have power and they want a share of it.
This is something you asked Dame Penny Mordaunt. Here's what she had to say.
I'm guessing you're not going to be departing for reform.
No, I'm not. I'm staying with the Conservatives.
Have you actually ever been approached?
Funnily enough, no. Although Nigel Farage did once say I looked like a Roman goddess. I don't know whether it's an overture, but no, because and I'm sure there's a lot.
We don't want to get into a discussion about which Roman goddess, because that.
No. Well, yes, that's that. He didn't specify.
I love the Roman goddess reference.
I know.
And I've been sort of thinking, which Roman goddess are we thinking about? And I've got a couple. I'm sure you've got... You're a man with a classical education, Matt. I'm sure you've got a couple.
You go first.
Juno, who is the statuesque queen of the gods, is one possibility. But I suspect Penny Mordaunt would prefer to be Diana the Hunter.
Wow. Well, Trevor, you're wrong. I mean, they didn't do classics at my North Wales Comprehensive, to be entirely candid with you. But luckily, ChatGPT serves a purpose these days. Glancing down, I think the most likely for Dame Penny Mordaunt is Anna Perenna, who was the goddess of the cycle of the year. We're barely into a new year. It makes sense. That leaves me with two more Fs to use, Trevor. One is Fanks, and the other one is Trevor Phillips, obviously. Probably both incorrect.
And they taught you a lot of good spelling at that school, didn't they?
There you go. Very literate, as you can tell. Good stuff. Good to see you. Have a good weekend.
Good to see you, Matt. Cheers. Bye-bye.